Is saturated fat bad? One of the largest and most rigorous diet studies ever conducted says, no, not as far as we can tell. The Minnesota Coronary Survey was a well-organized, well-funded, double-blind study involving 9,000 people that took place over 4.5 years. The 9,000 people were in various hospitals and nursing homes and were given identical meals. The difference being that one group got butter in their meal and one got vegetable oil. This type of study is expensive and extremely difficult to set up and coordinate, especially at this scale. One of the key findings in this experiment was that the investigators were unable to confirm their original hypothesis that a cholesterol-lowering diet would lead to reduced heart attacks. What they found was in fact the opposite. The greater the drop in cholesterol, the greater the risk of mortality. They reduced cholesterol by replacing butter with corn oil. The people eating vegetable oil lowered their cholesterol levels all right, but actually had more heart attacks, and the heart attacks increased proportionally to how much lower their cholesterol got. Let me repeat that for you. The researchers were trying to demonstrate that lowering cholesterol reduces heart attack risk, and they actually demonstrated the exact opposite. Cholesterol doesn't cause itself to be plastered on the inside of your arteries. The cholesterol on the inside of your arteries is the body's attempt to patch up damage caused by inflammation. And if you haven't guessed it yet, we'll be getting into which fats are inflammatory and which are anti-inflammatory in a little bit. Part of the reason we ended up believing vegetable oil was healthy was because researchers like those in the Minnesota Coronary Survey didn't publish their results. They spent huge sums of money, time, and energy on a rigorous double-blind study that didn't prove what they were trying to prove, so they sat on their results and didn't publish them. It wasn't until 40 years later that someone dug up the results for review and was blown away. A similar study, the Sydney Heart Health Study, demonstrated worse results for vegetable oil and was also swept under the rug. This stuff actually happens in science. A guy named Ansel Keys was again involved in the Minnesota study and again did not share evidence that disproved his beliefs. If you've spent even a Saturday afternoon studying nutrition science and the debate over saturated fat or carbohydrates, you've heard of this highly cited, highly debated guy. To think that scientists could never be deceitful or bought off with money or lie to protect their way of life is to make the same mistake religious people might make in believing that a priest could never molest a child or never tell a lie. These are people that we're talking about here, and this is exactly the kind of shit that people do. They put themselves, their reputations, and their ability to provide for their family first. Everything and everyone else comes second to them and their family. This is how it is for most people. Yes, even for people who appear to be holier than thou. Whether we're talking about doctors, police officers, politicians, priests, or scientists, there are plenty of good ones and plenty of shitty ones, just like any other cross-section of humanity. They want to keep their jobs, keep their sense of authority, and not look stupid, so they'll be very slow to admit they're wrong about anything. They will argue and debate to defend their position to the bitter end. Progress usually happens when outdated ideas die with the people in positions of authority who hold them. Then someone new steps in with their new perspectives. Rarely, if ever, has someone approached the establishment with paradigm-shifting ideas and convinced them to change their mind with evidence. It's not how human beings operate. They'll say that they operate that way, but if you observe their behavior, this is obviously not the case. Truth and doing what's right is a nice ideal when it's convenient, but comes second to survival for most people, especially people in positions of power and authority. Their reputations are very closely tied to their ability to survive and provide. They can't afford to be wrong about stuff, which often translates to they can't afford to admit they were wrong about stuff and will argue with you until the cows come home to protect their reputation and livelihood. Established authority may or may not be conscious of the fact that they're wrong about something. It would change everything if it turned out they were wrong, and people generally don't like change, especially if they already have power and money. Change and new ideas are exactly what threatens that. It means there's new people with new ideas gaining new authority on the matter now. This displaces old ideas and the life work of many people in the establishment. They will use and abuse logic just as diligent attorneys do to prove their case. Just because someone can prove something using logic doesn't mean that it's true. This has been demonstrated many times with court cases and scientific discoveries. I'm not saying corporations or malicious deep state government agencies are doing this deliberately in any sort of conspiratorial way. Grand conspiracies are not required for what I just said to make sense. I'm talking about human nature, our current level of development as a whole, and the type of society it produces. Some people say I spend a lot of time putting down science and authorities. I'm doing this to highlight how important it is that we learn how to think for ourselves. Some things you really do have to invest time and energy in to become your own expert. Understanding your health and how your own individual body works is one of those things. So many health considerations depend on the individual. It's different for everyone and has to be discovered individually. If you have lineage and genetics from the far north and your ancestors had to eat meat to survive, then perhaps a mostly animal-based diet is best for you. If you came from a place where your ancestors could dig up tubers year-round, then perhaps your body is oriented to thrive on a mostly plant-based diet. Here's how you figure out what you should be eating. Step 1. Stop viewing this shit as black and white. Step 2. Realize that you are more than likely in the gray area in between somewhere. There's no such thing as one diet that is optimal for everyone, everywhere, all the time. Stop looking for it and start experimenting to find out what foods work best for you. Listen to your body more and talking heads less. When people simply obey and do whatever the authorities suggest without questioning or experimenting for themselves, mistakes and corruption are passed down through the hierarchy. Science in the mind of the individual is able to change conclusions quickly in the face of new evidence. Science in the establishment, within hierarchies of powerful people and their money, does not change its conclusions quickly in the face of new evidence. In fact, the establishment will usually resist change and defend their ideas because no one in charge wants to appear incompetent and admit they were wrong about shit. Have you noticed this about human nature? This is how people are. It's very important that you understand this. The facts and newly discovered truths you might read somewhere today will take decades to enter the education curriculum or become part of our dietary recommendations. The major problem is not science itself, it's the context and the environment in which the science is taking place. Humanity is still in its infancy and is attempting to use a powerful tool it does not yet understand. It's not wise to teach science to people without first teaching them about the philosophy on which their entire perspective and belief system is resting. When you leave philosophy out of education, it becomes indoctrination. This is where dogma comes from, and dogmatic people are very slow to change their minds if they do at all. Anyways, here's another important point about the length of research studies in chronic disease. The Minnesota experiment was conducted over 4.5 years. The majority of other experiments testing the safety of vegetable oil and other edible food-like substances are also conducted for less than 5 years. So here's an important question for you. How long does it take to develop cancer, heart disease, sterility issues, and just chronic disease in general? Do you think it takes more or less than 5 years? How long does it take for smoking to cause cancer? This is why you can't simply believe whatever headline or abstract you read and think that's the end of the story. This is what I mean when I say so many studies have bullshit parameters and bullshit assumptions and therefore bullshit conclusions. What does it mean to say something is safe if you have no way of testing it to see if it causes cancer, cardiovascular disease, and other ailments over the course of a human lifetime? What does this bullshit word safe actually mean? I'll tell you what it means. It means they couldn't find any acute problems with what they were testing in their very limited research. It means it's unlikely to kill you quickly, but still could kill you slowly. They don't know. They didn't test for that. Acquired chronic diseases come from things that kill you slowly, not quickly. I really hope you're getting it. I'm not just talking about vegetable oil and industrial chemicals here. I'm talking about the root cause of chronic ailments in the body. It's not something you can test in a 3 or a 5-year trial and conclude it's safe. The word safe is not an appropriate word. It's very misleading. There's not a practical, affordable, or ethical way to conduct a study that proves any one particular thing causes cancer, cardiovascular disease, or any other chronic ailment in a human lifespan. In fact, we still haven't proved that cigarettes cause lung cancer. Yes, really. In the world of health and in many other scientific arenas, proving something is difficult, if not impossible to do. What we end up with are fancy words like causal inference, which includes assumptions and estimations to make a leap and an educated best guess. This is all that anyone ever has, a best guess based on limited information. What we have is causal inference that cigarettes cause cancer, not proof. In our society, that's good enough for a court of law, which is fine with me because I'm following the breadcrumbs too. I'm making the same assumptions, and my educated best guess about what's going on is the same as everyone else's when it comes to cigarettes. We use our assumptions to make educated best guesses based on limited information. These educated best guesses based on limited information are what people who do not understand philosophy refer to as truth and facts. Different people can reach different conclusions based on the same evidence. This happens every day among scientists. Most of the things that we say have been proved have enough correlation and dots to connect that we say there is causal inference, and we form a conclusion, which is a fancy way of saying assumption. These become the blind spots where surprises are found later. Science is not nearly as black and white as it's made out to be. It's still a bunch of people with preconceived notions thinking about stuff and connecting the dots in their own unique ways while trying to follow an arbitrary methodology that someone else came up with that's already been proven to be faulty. On top of that, large-scale science brings money and politics into the equation. You can't put assumptions into an equation or this machine of science and expect to get truth and facts out the other end. So much of the stuff we now know gets proven wrong when we're exposed to new information, expand our perspectives, and evolve. We keep using these building blocks of stuff we now know to conclude things, even though they're really, if we're being honest, in sort of a superposition of being possibly true or possibly false. They seem to be true from our limited perspective now, but if the scientists are being honest and open-minded like they keep insisting they are, then they must admit that any conclusions they're making now could turn out to be wrong, just like so many other scientific facts and conclusions before. Hindsight and looking back reveals just how often the smartest people in the world are wrong about shit. It's a Schrodinger's cat type of situation for those of you who are familiar. Your entire worldview is resting on these cats, and you don't actually know whether they're dead or alive, true or false. We don't actually know whether the previous conclusions that we're using to form additional conclusions are true or not. You have to make an assumption that science has been right about these previous conclusions in order to use those conclusions to form new conclusions. But we already know this isn't true. Science has already proven that science is wrong about shit all the time. Do you see the problem yet? Do you see the fundamental issue with human knowledge? This is epistemology that you're learning right now, and by the time you're done listening to me ramble on, you'll know more about philosophy of science than most scientists. Your paradigm is your worldview. It's the lens that you see the world through. Everything gets filtered through this lens. It's the most fundamental level of your mental operating system. When there's an error or a distortion at this root level of the operating system is not able to recognize its own error because the error recognition system is experiencing errors and distortions. This is the fundamental problem that everyone faces with their worldview, regardless of what it is. This is what it means to be human. People make mistakes and people assume incorrectly all the time. Assumptions were made to even come up with the methodology of science. Science has already proven that science can be wrong about very big important things and undergo paradigm shifts where the previous conclusions need to be disregarded and everything needs to be rethought in the light of a new understanding. This is a regular part of human growth in conducting science. Let's get back to nutrition science. It's difficult and expensive enough to do a 5-year study, which is simply not long enough, as I pointed out earlier. The real testing of whether or not chemicals and edible food-like substances are safe is taking place right now on the population as a whole. This large-scale experiment is currently being conducted, and the participants are anyone who is consuming this stuff. We can only figure out the truth with hindsight as we look back to see if the people who are consuming this stuff end up with a chronic disease or dead. This is how all drugs and man-made concoctions are tested for links to chronic disease over a long period of time, by first passing trials as safe and then opening up to the public guinea pigs for consumption and observation. This is not a conspiracy. There is simply no other time-efficient and profitable way to do this. Companies don't want to wait around for 20 or 30 years worth of expensive studies before they can sell their new creations. They'll do as little testing as they can get away with to keep costs low and get their product to market quickly. Even if they're wrong about the safety, they can still make plenty of money before the product is recalled. And if they have good lawyers, they can wiggle out steep penalties for hurting and killing people. This is how the system works, because it's these kinds of big business interests that shape the system through legalized bribery known as lobbying, among many other tactics. So a business will get their experimental product to market as soon as possible. Then, through observation, researchers will look for patterns and try their best to figure out what's making people sick and dead. This is how and why the FDA recalls 1,200 drugs a year when they realize too many people are dying or getting sick from it. Evil intentions are not required for this experimentation on the public that is taking place right now. Most of the doctors and scientists involved believe they are doing good and helping people. How else could it be? How have we been learning so far what laboratory creations cause illness or death down the road? 100,000 people die every year taking prescription drugs as prescribed by their doctors. I'm not talking about abusers, I'm talking about innocent people who do what they're told by the experts they trust most. How else could we possibly learn which of our chemical concoctions tend to hurt people without assuming some degree of safety and giving it to people? I'm telling you all this because I want to highlight how important it is that you do everything you can to take care of your mind and body and not get yourself into a position where you need this kind of experimental help. If you're already sick, you'll have to research alternatives to the system I'm describing on your own and learn about your body and health from the ground up. There's risk in dealing with these industries, and for some, there's risk in not dealing with these industries. It's something that needs to be understood first, then decided by the individual. If you're getting all your information from one source or a group of people who all subscribe to the same methodology and same perspective, who went through the same schooling, same indoctrination process, you're going to end up with a very biased and incomplete perspective. Seek information from multiple experts, from multiple disciplines, then practice connecting the dots and forming your own conclusions. This is a spiritual growth course designed to help you transcend the bullshit and awaken. You're going to have some very tough decisions to make in the near future. I'm trying to teach you critical thinking. That's what these monologues are, where I'm questioning the established knowledge, and that's what this is all about. You need to develop the right balance of critical thinking and intuition to move through this world with any sort of grace. Just because you were told that you were taught critical thinking in school doesn't mean you were actually taught it. Critical thinking is the connecting of dots in a world full of variables and uncertainty. That's what critical thinking is. What you learned in school is primarily a mechanical sort of thinking, a form of logic. That and a lot of memorization and regurgitation. Critical thinking questions the building blocks on which your cognition is taking place. Mechanical thinking assumes the building blocks are correct until proven otherwise and starts from there. You cannot conduct science without making assumptions about causality, time, space, and the effects of consciousness on matter. None of these assumptions have been or can be proved. You can't consider anything you're concluding to be a fact if you used assumptions to get there. This is so basic. It's not just science that has this problem, it's fundamental to human perspective. You can't conclude anything as a human being without first making assumptions. Philosophy is what questions the building blocks and assumptions, but is completely left out of science. The highest schooling achievement you can earn in our system is a PhD, which is known as a Doctor of Philosophy. This used to actually mean something, but nowadays, most of the doctors and scientists I've met with PhDs did not actually study philosophy or know much about it, which is the wobbly foundation that all of their knowledge and work is resting on. When we question our assumptions and discover something new in the wobbly foundation, science undergoes a paradigm shift and has to rethink much of what it concluded previously. Oh shit, the Earth is revolving around the sun and not the other way around? Well, this changes everything. Holy shit, matter behaves differently depending on whether or not someone is watching it? Well, this changes everything. We have 100 years worth of double slit experiments demonstrating this, by the way. It'll likely be the next paradigm shift whenever the establishment is ready to reconsider their assumptions about being able to separate consciousness from matter. The two are entangled. The most brilliant scientists in history have been trying to explain this to the other scientists, but it's a paradoxical truth that can't be communicated with words or symbols. Even though the placebo effect demonstrates people in fact do heal themselves through the power of belief, science still classifies people who use this power to cure their own cancer and other ailments as spontaneous healings, as if beliefs in consciousness had nothing to do with it, even though science has already demonstrated that it does. The establishment in science will still call anyone who thinks they can heal with the power of belief a quack or a pseudoscientist, even though the scientists have to use placebos in their research to account for the well-known fact that beliefs do change outcomes and heal people. I'm going over this stuff and talking about these studies not so I can show you the evidence and prove something to you. Anyone on the other side of the debate can do the same thing. I'm going over all this stuff with you because I want to teach you how to think for yourself. I figure rather than going over some hypothetical examples, let's just go over nutrition science. I said it earlier and I'll say it again. By the time you're done listening to me ramble on and wrap this up tomorrow, you'll know more about philosophy of science than most scientists and PhDs. I wish I was kidding, but I'm not. Scientists and doctors are very educated, but when you leave philosophy out of education, it becomes indoctrination, which becomes dogma, which forms ideologies, which become more concerned with self-preservation and being right than the truth and helping people. Keep listening and you'll also learn how to look good in a swimsuit, live a long, healthy life, and achieve a new level of clarity and mental stability to help you with your spiritual growth process. I'm explaining this to help you question and transcend any limiting beliefs you may still be holding on to. Your beliefs form the walls and the ceilings within your infinite consciousness. I think that's enough for today. Plenty more tomorrow.